Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is the fourth in a sequence of posts about reading Charles Goodhart's book on the evolution of central banking. If you want to catch up, you can use the link on this slide to go back to the first lecture and catch up. We have just finished chapter 1, and before going on to chapter 2, I want to discuss the importance of understanding history for the sake of understanding economic theory. Now, it is an obvious truth that economic theories analyze specific historical systems. In nomadic societies, there was no production, so economic theory in a nomadic society would deal with how we find places where we can find some good land for hunting or for gathering, and it would have to do with seasons and where to move from one place to another place, etc. So it would have no resemblance to our modern economic theory. As you moved from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, it is clear that in an agricultural society, you must have private property, because the person who plants the seeds must own the right to harvest the planting. So private property becomes important only in agricultural societies. Then we moved to feudal societies, and these were mostly self-sufficient in commodities, and they operate using barter. Well, it's not necessarily barter, but it's that the goal of life is to have commodities. So I can sell commodities for money, and then I can use the commodity to buy more commodities, something which Karl Marx has called CMC prime. So in a barter society, the goal is to have commodities. Market societies are very different, because in market societies, money is the main driver. Producers use money to produce commodities, but these commodities are not produced for consumption. They are produced for sale in order to get more money. So the formula driving the society is MCM prime. You start with money, convert it to commodities, and those commodities are converted back into more money. This inversion of the usual goals is tremendously important in understanding market societies, and it is worth noting that our economic theory today is an economic theory of a barter society where money is available, because basically what we are doing is we are using money to change from one set of commodities to another. But this is no longer how our society works. So there is a big mismatch between economic theory and the actual workings of a market society. Now, what we want to argue is that economic theories cannot be understood outside their historical context. Keynes encountered the Great Depression, in which all current economic theories of the time failed, because all of those theories said that unemployment would automatically be eliminated by the free market. But Keynes observed that this did not happen, so he created a new theory. So this theory is really about the Great Depression and how to understand the Great Depression. And if we study Keynesian theory without knowing about the Great Depression, we cannot understand it. Similarly, more recently, there is Minsky's financial fragility theory, which arose because Minsky saw that the banking system was very unstable and had repeated crises, and he tried to understand why this was so. We have an ancient theory of mercantilism, in which the main recommendation is that societies should accumulate gold, and this seems very strange from modern perspective, but it was very understandable from that point of time, because at that time European history was driven by continuous wars between different powers, and these wars required a lot of gold. So economic theory of the time put a lot of emphasis on acquiring gold so that you can have power. More interestingly, it's not just that theories are generated by history, but also history is shaped by theories. Because when we face an economic problem, how do we solve it? Well, we solve it in the light of the theories that we have. For example, right after the Great Depression, Hayek, who was a free market economist, he said that the government should do nothing because automatically the free market will solve this problem, and anything government does will make it worse. Keynes said that no, unemployment emerges naturally in free markets, and so the government must intervene to bring about full employment. So if Hayek had been believed, then nothing would have been done, and Great Depression would have gone on for much longer and had much more severe economic consequences. In the post-World War II era, prosperity and full employment was achieved by Keynesian demand management policies. In the 1970s, the Chicago School and the free marketeers arose for various reasons, and they had this natural rate of unemployment theory. And this theory has had tremendous influence in shaping policy, monetary policy throughout the world. So this monetary policy has also led to low inflation, but at a tremendous cost in terms of growth and unemployment. So the economic history of the world is shaped by the theories that we have about economics. Now these things are more or less obvious, but economists do not agree and do not accept these obvious truths. So there is a question as to why economists don't use history, they don't study history. In a course on monetary policy today, you will not study the history of central banks. So this is a long and complicated story. There is a link on this page which you can study for the details of this story. But very briefly, there was a battle of science and Christianity in Europe, and this battle led to the victory of science. So in Europe, science became accepted as the new religion, which means that it was the only source, it was regarded to be the only source of certain knowledge. In late 19th century, a battle of methodologies took place between the natural approach to economics, which is based on qualitative and historical methods, and this was replaced by mathematical, quantitative, and so-called scientific methods. In the early 20th century, social science was created, and this was based on a misunderstanding of the scientific method known as logical positivism. And this misconception about what science is was applied to create the foundations of economics in a supposedly scientific way. So what does this scientific approach lead to? Well, one of the key things is that everything that we study must be a universal invariant. So the laws of physics are the same all across the universe. So similarly, we study for economic laws which are the same across time and space. So one of the implications is that we must look at human behavior which is invariant. Now human behavior varies by society, by time, by many other factors, but economic theory does not accept this because it has to be scientific. So what is the model for behavior? Again, rejection of God, victory of science led to the idea that the only thing that we can all search for is utility maximization, that is maximizing our pleasure in this life. This is actually a new religion which was invented by Jeremy Bentham, who invented utility theory. And this is not justified by faith, but it is justified by the idea of rationality, that if we have rationality, then we must reject the unseen, afterlife, God, angels, everything. And so if we only have this life that we can see, then it makes sense to try to maximize our pleasure while living. So just for another example, the theory of international trade that you will study in your economics books is again abstracted. It has to do with any two countries, X and Y, at any time and place. So the economic theory for the trade between Brazil and China in 19th century is going to be the same as the theory of trade between India and Pakistan in the 20th century. So this theory is false because trade depends on a lot of local historical factors. For example, the trade between India and Pakistan is very low because these countries have fought many wars over the past decades. And so this theory, which doesn't take into account how politics affects trade, is very deficient and blind to the realities. There is a book by Geoffrey Hodgson called How Economics Forgot History. Economics searches for the one truth which is the same at all times, and economists don't understand that this truth about our system changes with time and evolves. The global financial crisis of 2007 demonstrates the complete failure of economics because economists ignore history and because they are based on wrong methodology. By incorporating theory and using better methodology, we can get a much deeper understanding of economics. Just to give a very simple example, in the 20th century, World War I led to the breakdown of the gold standard because a lot of gold was spent by the countries. World War II led to Bretton Woods, which was a new way of managing the monetary system. And in 1971, Nixon abandoned gold banking, and that led to the floating exchange rate system. And then financial deregulation in 1990s led to the shadow banking sector. So all of these events are very closely tied to historical happenings, and we can't understand finance in the 20th century without taking into account the effect of the Vietnam War and the two world wars and certain other important factors. But economists do not study these things because of their misconception that economics must be a science. So this creates a golden opportunity for us. If we study history carefully and if we use the improved methodology, we can substantially improve how we do economic theory, and we can create much better theories based on deeper knowledge of history and superior methodology. This has never been done by economists, so this is a new area, and so there are many important insights that we can achieve by applying these methods. There is a problem with this approach that mainstream orthodox economists don't accept this approach. However, this is not a problem anymore. First of all, this is very highly acceptable by the general public, and many alternative journals which explore these new ideas have come up. So this is to encourage all of you to adopt these and understand these methods and learn to use them.